Hello, my name is Dayib. I have started a YouTube channel called Politecity, and it's about talking about politically not correct things at the moment and showing both sides of the story. I'm from the UK, or I'm from the UK, but originally I'm from Somalia, Africa. And I came here when I was 4 years old, and then since then, I've just been into poetry, rap, and that sort of thing.
And so the way I got to know about what you're doing is I actually had done some radio interviews with a guy up in Canada, and we were talking about the situation with the Derek Chauvin case and some of the different shootings that had happened in the United States. And I came across your work, and I realized that I think it'd be fair to say that you've called out the violence of the police, but at the same time, address the fact that some of these guys had done some very bad stuff themselves. I think that's fair to say.
That is what I have said. It doesn't take away from the fact that what the police have done is not necessarily the correct way to conduct themselves with. However, what I've noticed in where I've grown up is the police deal with people in two different ways. The people who have got a criminal past, I noticed that they act different towards them and they behave more aggressive towards them than if somebody who's never had a warning, never had anything, or they don't have a history with, then they just generally they approach them in a more polite manner. That's what I've seen in my own personal experience.
And so, I mean, it seems like the problem's a lot worse here in the United States. But I mean, as far as policing in England, how is it different? Like, for instance, I know the citizens there generally are not allowed to have firearms. Do the police carry firearms still, or do they not carry guns typically?
They've only very recently started having a arms unit, but it's only very few of the police officers, and they cover wide swaths of land. But here mostly they do not carry any guns. It took a long time for them to even carry a taser. They thought that was a bit too far. So yeah, they generally they understand that if you bring out more heavy armor, then the criminals will then also reciprocate, and vice versa. So they try to keep that on the low.
And I would say here in the United States, sometimes we have this where people will be protesting about the issue, the single issue about, police brutality and so forth. And some of the protesters kind of try to use it as a way to get people into maybe a different, bigger agenda, like pushing socialism and pushing ideologies like that. I mean, do you ever see that kind of thing happening in England with, rallies that are happening out there?
I have been to a rally recently called "Kill the Bill." Sounds aggressive, but what they wanted to do was they're introducing this new bill, which is basically going to limit or give the police more power so that they can crash down or hit down on protests. Say, for example, if they say it's a bit too loud, so we're going to break up the entire protest. That defeats the whole purpose of protesting, because you're meant to be loud, you're meant to be trying to disturb something, but now they're basically putting out this new police bill which gives the police more power to crack down. And I went to that bill believing in that bill, but what I found is when I went there was a lot of other agendas flying, like socialism. Today there was flags about socialism, there was flags about communism, and I was going, this wasn't the reason why I came out. So I understand what you're saying, but there are a lot of people in the wings that try to hijack every movement.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I mean, what I saw here in the United States, I mean, I guess it's been like that with a lot of things, be it the Iraq war protests or protests about unions. It's like people will come for one cause, and then there's people bringing in other causes. And I know a lot of guys in this country who are African American who care very seriously about the whole issue about police brutality. But then, they go to these rallies and they realize there are people talking about capitalism and how they're against capitalism. And so that seems like that's a pretty common thread. With COVID and the virus and everything, have they limited people's ability to have protests and rallies there in the UK?
No, not necessarily. They have given some broad outlines, such as you should stay away from each person a certain distance. However, there's no way to generally enforce that with thousands of or tens of thousands of people. And I have noticed that the people who do go to these sorts of rallies are younger, so they generally don't tend to care about their health as much. They have the immortality syndrome, and they generally are anti-establishment as well. So the more anti-establishment you are, the less likely you'll listen to any guidelines anyone gives you. The more guidelines you get, the more fun it is to break. To be honest.
I mean, I guess it's kind of the same thing with here in, well, I'm not too far from the state capital, which is Madison, Wisconsin, and it's kind of like if you got 5 people doing a little rally that's breaking some laws, they're not going to ignore that as much. But if you've got 100 people, it's like, I mean, we had riots, massive riots all over the United States last summer, and I think part of it is just you've got thousands of people breaking windows and crazy stuff. What is the situation there? I mean, now in England, I mean, is the government helping people get the vaccine? How is that?
Rolling it out. They are rolling it out pretty fast, to be honest. I thought they would be a lot slower. But what in our country, every time something the president or the government does something good, then the opposition has to bring out a scandal. So now everyone's concentrating on Boris Johnson, our prime minister's scandal
Yep.
of basically somebody paid for his wallpaper, and they want to find out who paid for his wallpaper. That's what we call a scandal here.
I kind of, what is it? Is it that he collects miniature buses or he makes miniature buses? What's his? If there's some art thing he does, I thought it was funny.
Oh, models. He loves models. Yeah, and he does a bit of painting as well, to be honest. What about you guys? Is Biden? Is there any scandals with Biden, or is he just straight across the board?
That's a great question. I mean, it's been said that he has connections that he and especially his son have these business connections with, various countries overseas, and Biden. I mean, one thing he's well known for is it's pretty creepy. He for years and years and years he would sniff people. Like there would be these photo ops, and he would always go up to the wife or children and smell them. And
I saw a meme. I saw a meme saying, of pictures of him, and it said, "See you later, alligator." And then for him, when he was sniffing all the girls, he was going, "In a while, pedophile." I'm very familiar. I thought it was a funny meme myself.
Oh, I mean, it's always this lesser of the two evils here. I mean, we have more than 2 political parties, but we don't even let the third or fourth parties into any of the debates. It's always Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter what the office is. And I mean, Biden, he had voted for the Iraq war and terrible drug policies and all sorts of things over the years. And, I mean, he was up against Donald Trump. So it was just all he had to do was not be Donald Trump. And I do see those similarities between Trump and your Prime Minister, Boris.
Yes, there are a lot of similarities. But to be honest, Boris is a bit more restrained than Trump. Trump actively wanted attention. Boris accidentally gets it. He stumbles into attention by falling, tripping, getting stuck on a zip wire. I don't think they're intentional, but yeah, they're both, how can I say, populists. What do you think of this movement of populism then across the world?
That's a good question. I mean, because in the United States, I would say we had 2 major well-known populists. You had Donald Trump on one side, and then you had Bernie Sanders, which I think he's kind of like the American version of Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes.
And the thing about him is he's like, oh, democratic socialism, blah blah blah, and he comes off like he's this hippie kind of peacenik, beatnik kind of a guy. And the truth is, well, he actually takes in hundreds of thousands of dollars from people who make drones, and he's taken in money from I want to say banking and pharmaceutical and oil. I mean, he's not the hippie peace dove everybody makes him out to be. But the populism thing, I mean, part of it is kind of scary to me because the mastermind behind Donald Trump in many ways was this guy named Steve Bannon. And
Yeah.
I totally disagree with him on a bunch of stuff, but like, is the man very like educated and skilled? And like, it's the populism thing is scary because it's like, I think you can agree with them on some things, but you know, like
But then
what the real agenda is might be behind a curtain.
I totally understand what you mean. And to be honest, I think they do that on purpose. Like nobody ever expected Hitler to kill the Jews out of the wings. That was never part of his that was never his call in the first place. He was just saying we need more jobs. We need more jobs. Look, we're getting taken advantage of from everyone in the rest of Europe, which was true because after they lost World War One, they have to pay the indemnities. And then all of a sudden, he just started bringing out all these wacky far right wing ideas, which not necessarily was what he was calling for in the first place, but everyone agreed because everything else was going all right. That being said, populism, I think, is something that goes in cycles. So we won't have it for a very long time. And then people will get tired of the other form of politics because it gets stale and boring and people just want change. And then populism then just suddenly becomes popular again, as in and that form of politics will then immediately rear its head once the other one wanes. Do you agree with that?
It meant it very much. And I mean, I think one thing that really helped Trump get elected was that, you know, we had, well, first we actually had a president named, well, we had Ronald Reagan, then we had George Bush, then we had Bill Clinton, then we had George Bush's son, George W. Bush, and we had 8 years of him where he, you know, got us into Iraq and Afghanistan and had all these terrible policies. And then we get Barack Obama and it's like, all right, great, a first black president, you know, and then he actually continued lots and lots of George W. Bush's policies, be it, you know, tax cuts, financial bailouts, war policies. He ramped up the drone program, started bombing Pakistan. And so for a lot of people, they can kind of look at Bush and Obama and see them really as the same in so many policies. And so Trump kind of, and he, you know, he was so weird as he was a Republican, but he kind of ran to the left of people like Hillary Clinton. And, you know, in part using the populism. And Hillary Clinton, my God, like she was such an awful candidate, and they never, most people don't want to accept the fact that she was just a bad candidate. They say, oh, it was Russia putting out memes and it was this and that and everything, but the fact that she was a bad candidate with a very, very bad track record.
I think
And
the last two elections that you've just talked about, the Trump and Clinton, and the other one, Trump and Biden, it truly proves that people don't vote for people; they vote against people. So initially, they didn't necessarily want Clinton because of what she represented. So I thought a lot of people came out, a lot of people didn't come out for Clinton or against her. But this time, because of what Trump represented in the media, mainstream media, a lot of people came out again or just did it through the post to get rid of him rather than to vote for Biden.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in many ways, if, for instance, if the Democratic Party did not exist, probably a lot of these Republicans wouldn't even, these conservatives wouldn't even vote Republican. They would just vote for an independent that more better represented their views. And the scariest part of all is that, you know, there's two things that's going to happen with Donald Trump. I mean, three, I guess. One, he's really old, so who knows what health problems he might have. But he's either going to run for president again in 2024, or they're going to find some tax violation, something he did illegal somewhere, and try to indict him on something. And maybe, you know, maybe he'll end up in jail. Maybe he'll just become a felon where he can't run for office. But, you know, just the other day, they were the federal agents were raiding Rudy Giuliani, the lawyer of Donald Trump, and another lawyer of Donald Trump's whose name I can't remember. And so I think they're really trying to bust Donald Trump right now to stop him from running for president in 2024.
I don't think they want to go all the way because they're happy to see the civil war that's going on right now between McConnell and Trump. But what I found interesting about the raid of Rudy Giuliani, I don't know if it's true, but this is his version on Fox. He stated that they had a subpoena for all of his electronics, And then they refused to take 2 hard drives. He said, "Why don't you take those 2 hard drives?" And they said, "Oh, that's not in our remit." And he goes, "No, those two hard drives are Hunter Biden's hard drives. You can take them. It's within your scope of investigation. You have to take all the hard drive. You don't know what's in that. It could be it could be I could be lying. Do you understand? You can't take my word for it. But those are Hunter Biden's thingy. Take it." They refused to take it.
That
What do you
is
think
that
of
is
that?
that's pretty interesting. I mean, that story, it was like if that story had been one of the Trump sons, that story would have been everywhere.
Yeah.
And I remember when I think it was like the New York Post wrote the story, and even Twitter tried to make it where the story could not be shared. And a lot of it was stuff that, I didn't wasn't surprising to me at all, because I remember back when Obama was president and I heard the story about Biden's son becoming this, executive overseeing a company in the Ukraine. Back when Obama was still president, I thought that was insanely corrupt. I also thought it was really strange that Joe Biden had 2 sons, and one of them was well, they had both served in the military. Hunter had been kicked out of the military for using drugs, but the other son had passed away from cancer, and then Hunter married Bo's widow, which is kind
Wow.
of, that people don't typically do that anymore. And of course he cheated on her and then was with another woman and another woman. And Biden's son got some major issues about him. But
No,
on
I
another note,
totally.
you let me ask you about the PC culture and political correctness and whatnot. Well, I mean, as far as your freedom of speech in England, is it true that you can be fined or arrested for posting something on Facebook? I've heard this story before.
They're cracking down more on online bullying, they say. So basically, if you say something nasty now, there are potential fines, even potential arrests if it's hate speech, which
Mhm.
I genuinely don't understand, because they don't make it expressly clear what is considered hate speech. It's such a broad brush that anything can come under it now and in the future. So it continues with whatever society perceives as hatred, or perceives could incite hatred, which I think is too broad for them. That would mean that anybody that writes anything jokey, or writes a joke on Facebook could be considered hate speech in the future,
Yeah,
which
it's
I
when
think.
I mean, in the United States, I wouldn't say there's as many repercussions. Like, for instance, you're not going to have the police bust you for saying something. It's more this cancel culture will go after you, especially if you're well known. And what's really crazy in the United States is we have all these well-known comedians and talk show hosts like Chelsea Hadler and Jimmy Kimmel and so forth, and Stephen Colbert. And you go look at their work 15, 20 years ago, and they were saying what would be very offensive today, but
Yeah.
they kind of hold this torch like, I'm fighting for everybody and I'm so perfect. And it's like the Chelsea Hadler one, for instance, this woman who's, I don't know if she's still an alcoholic now, but basically her skit was that she was a raging alcoholic and she had this show, and she referred to her Mexican co-host as the Nugget. Was the I mean, and or Sarah Silverman's got a TV
Oh
show,
no.
and she would make all these crazy offensive jokes about the men she was sleeping with and so forth. And
Do you watch Bill Burr comedy? Do you
Bill
watch Bill
Burr.
Burr? Yeah.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. There's a part that you reminded me, to do with Chelsea Handler. He doesn't mention her name, but he mentions a well-known personality who, when he's walking off the stage, flicks his dick, like just like that, and it
Yep.
completely ruins his part. He doesn't know what's going on anymore. He's angry with her, and then he gets his anger issues out for like a whole week, going, "Why did she do this to me?" And then he realizes that she's won, and that was what Chelsea Handler does to him. Do you understand? And that was so. Yeah, I can understand. Like, what the point I'm trying to make is the PC culture. I believe it's something that keeps inching and inching and inching, taking away more and more freedom. Which is why I opened up my channel. Literally, the reason why I called it Politecity was, and then I put a P and then a line going across it and then a C was actually a way to say I don't. Political correctness should be cut in half, completely banned. If anything, it's the one thing that is actually taking away more of our identities than anything else. It's a way of erasing anything that is displeasurable to the state. I believe it's a tool that they're using to slowly just wean their ideology onto us into compliance. And once they take that away, then we're just blank sheep, and they can write whatever program they want to write.
Well, I agree, and I think one big problem about it is they want to throw everybody that they disagree with into the exact same camp, and well, I mean, the exact same group, and they don't make distinctions between the different people. Like, for instance, there was they still exist, I guess. There is a very well-known white nationalist who this guy is basically he is the modern day equivalent of a neo-Nazi, and he's spoken around the country and so forth. But they throw him in the same category as a conservative like Ben Shapiro or Milo Yiannopoulos, and they all get thrown into the same. And it's like, okay, well, there's a big difference between the white nationalist guy advocating for segregation and so forth and Ben Shapiro, the conservative commentator. And they tend to throw everybody. I mean, they recently they got a woman kicked off of Star Wars because she made some stupid reference about she said that conservatives are being treated like the way people were treated in Germany, and then she got fired for that. And then they were talking about it on the Bill Maher show, and this former U.S. senator was like, "Oh, well, she's a Nazi."
Who was the woman in the Mandalorian? What did she do? She liked something? Or...
She was a Nazi.
Oh, that's different, right? I'm thinking of somebody else. Well, she's not a Nazi.
She's a white. She's
involved. Look at that. You're calling her.
She's called other people Nazis.
Right.
So she's the Nazi.
Okay, everyone's a Nazi now.
Yeah.
She does hang with white supremacists.
It's like a Mel Brooks.
She does?
Movie.
Yeah.
Hangs with white supremacists.
I suppose I'm now subject to defamation.
I don't know. I mean, it depends on what your definition of white supremacist is. That also, the goalpost there changed a lot. Used to be a guy in a Klan hood who...
And it was like, whoa. Like, she's a conservative. She's not a Nazi. And they've got this thing about calling anybody that's conservative the Nazi word.
They got this idea, though, from the Republicans. I'll tell you what I mean. In Reagan time, the army was sent to Lebanon, and they were trying to understand what was going on. So there was some Israelis, there was some Christian Lebanese, there was some Muslim Lebanese, and there were just so many different factions within those Muslim and the Christian and the Jewish. So each one of them wanted to do something, and America didn't know what was going on, the American army. So what happened was a lot of Americans died. A lot of American soldiers died, so they had to fly out, and Ronald Reagan was in there, and then they discussed with each other what happened. Why did we completely fail the peace mission that we went out there for? And they said because we didn't know which factions was going on, we didn't know what was going on. We were trying to please too many people. So from now on, we're going to make everything clear and black and white. You're either with us or you're against us. There is no nuance anymore. And that's how they started using it on their foreign policies, which is, I wouldn't say it's not great, but it made things more clear for the armies. Okay. However, once I think Democrats got a hold of this ideology, they was like, we can use this for everything. We can use this internally as well. So you're either with us or you're the enemy. And I think that's where it came from. Even the Republicans, if you look at Bush, he used this same tactic when he said,
absolutely,
people, either with us or you're against us. So it's not just it's not just the Democrats and the left that are using this rhetoric. The right are using it, but for foreign policy mainly.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is very much like, I mean, and in many ways, George W. Bush was kind of a recreation of the Reagan years and what he, wanted to expand the military, take all these powers, talk about small government, but expand the size of government. Before we go, tell us where people can find your work on, Twitter and YouTube, things like that.
On YouTube, it's just Politecity. It's called Politecity, and I've done. There's a poetry news that I'm working on now. You've watched Game of Thrones, I assume. Who hasn't watched Game of Thrones? I'm doing a Game of Thrones theme of Boris Johnson and his chief advisor, who he got rid of earlier on, called Cummings, Dominic Cummings. So I've made Boris Johnson like Boris Baratheon or Robert Baratheon. And I've made each character a character from the Game of Thrones, and it's gonna be a huge saga where it's gonna be a continuation. But that's the fight that's gonna happen now. On Twitter, it's Politecity 1. Unfortunately, somebody took Politecity. I don't know who did that. Maybe somebody in Canada. But yes, it's Politecity 1. It's been an absolute honor, mate.
Well, it's funny because I kind of have a similar thing. I started doing the Whiskey Report back in 2018 as this video project, and now I'm starting to see there are these other whiskey reports where it's more just literally people talking about whiskey and like right now I think it's like 6:30 or no, it's like almost 7:30 in England.
Yeah
here it's only like 1 o'clock. So right now I'm actually drinking coffee, but sometimes when I'm recording and I'm recording later at night, which, it's funny. I was telling you, I got people in New Zealand I'm interviewing from time to time, and it's a little harder getting that because that's a 17-hour difference. So I have to film like late night my time so that it's, afternoon their time. And, but actually, before we go, going back to that subject matter about, the police and everything and these shootings and, and one thing in your poetry that I heard you talking about was, you were basically, talking about how Derek Chauvin is a murderer. And at the same time, I think we could agree that what happened to George Floyd was absolutely horrible. He shouldn't have been killed. He shouldn't have died like that. That was absolutely, but at the same time, he did some very bad things. So isn't it a little strange how there's kind of like this narrative of holding these people up like saints and heroes when...
Yes. No, I think what it is this is what they are told. They say they treat people in America as dumb. Okay, the media, they believe that they can only understand one line of narrative. So if you try to get something else, another point across, and say to them, look, actually, they were trying to get him into the car. Actually, they did put him in the car, and then he wouldn't stay in. Actually, he was already high then. If you try to give a different narrative to them, they think that will overload their brain, and so they only tell them one thing: him good, him bad. This is what happened. Murderer, saint. That's the storyline that people can understand, because apparently only fairy tales are what people can digest.
Yeah, and I mean, there's another case and luckily the guy survived and everything, but there's another case in Kenosha that led to these riots where they burnt down large parts of the city, and it actually led to other shootings in the city. But with the Jacob Blake case that happened, the guy who was shot in the back like 7 times and he survived and everything. Well, the thing about it was he committed sexual assault on this woman. He stole her car and her debit card, and he had her car, and the police were trying to stop him. And apparently they did tase him, and he kept walking, and he may or not been going for a knife in the car. And that's when they shot him. And then afterwards I see, people holding up these signs that says, "We love you, Jacob Blake." And it was so strange because just 3 years ago, it was, Trump made a comment about grabbing genitals, and so you had all these women wearing these pink hats talking about how sexual assault is horrible, and they don't want a rapist, as they said, in the White House. And then 3 years later, they're holding up signs for a guy who had committed sexual assault. And it's strange how there's multiple parts of any of these stories, and maybe everybody in the story is at fault on something, but like you said, they put together this narrative of this guy is the devil, this guy is an angel, and the media here.
There's also a martyr syndrome as well. So if for example Trump died just before the elections happened, as in just before the Biden won, he would have been hailed as the largest hero of all times, because death has a way of cleansing people's pasts. I don't know what it is, but it's just how human nature is. When somebody dies, especially if they're fighting for a cause, even if they're not fighting for a cause, somebody else is fighting for their cause. They instantly how can I say, anointed as a saint. So yes, I do. I understand from one point of view that people don't like to speak bad of the dead, which is probably also another thing that holds people back from saying, actually, that guy was a rapist. Oh, he's dead. So why are you saying that sort of thing? That's sort of feedback the people who push back against that narrative would say to you. And I think people are just too ashamed to then go after the dead person. What do you think of that?
There's definitely, yeah, it's definitely there is a lust for that sort of hero and martyr, and the narrative in America is oversimplified, I would say.
Yes, nuance has gone out the window.
All right, I thank you so much for taking the time. Everybody listening, you can check out his work at on YouTube and Twitter, and Politecity 1 and Twitter.
At Politecity 1 at Twitter, yeah. Thank you very much, my friend.
All right. Thank you very much for talking with us today.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.